Welcome to SSC Essentials, a podcast series exploring entries in the newly released Encyclopedia of the Social and Solidarity Economy, or SSE. The Encyclopedia is your comprehensive guide to the SSE, a concept recognized globally for its potential for inclusive and sustainable economic and social development. Published by Edward Elgar, the SSE Encyclopedia is a collective work of the United Nations Interagency Task Force on SSE, or UNTF-SSE. For today's episode, we have invited Professor Kunle Akingbola, Lakehead University, who contributed to the SSE Encyclopedia an entry on working conditions and wages of the SSE organizations and enterprises, together with his colleague, Harold Brunt, University of Wisconsin-Whitehead, the US. Professor Akingbola, thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much for having me.
Would you briefly introduce yourself for our listeners?
My name is Kunle Akingbola. I'm a professor of HR and Organizational Behavior at Lakehead University at the Aurelia campus in Ontario, Canada. My primary area of research is nonprofit HRM and social enterprises. I also do research on HRM in healthcare organizations.
Let's start off with the question about the SSE and yourself. You have researched a lot of issues related to strategic change and human resource management in nonprofit and healthcare organizations. When did you become interested in the organizational dynamics of SSE organizations and enterprises?
My research interest in the SSE sector as a whole started about 2 decades ago. I would say I stumbled into the sector in terms of research, but I do have a prior working experience in the sector. In the 90s, I worked as a manager for the Canadian Red Cross here in Toronto for a number of years. And I was involved in community activities even after that. That's morphed into my research interest in terms of the relationship between the sector, government funding, and how they manage, retain, and recruit people in the sector.
So you started paying interest to SSE organizations when you were working with the Red Cross.
My research interest started during my employment with the Canadian Red Cross. However, even before being employed in the sector, I had long-time interest in terms of the activities of the sector, involvement in disaster relief, community organizations, and now community organizations engage members of community to drive social change. So, but the primary research interest, I would say, started about 20 years ago when there was a significant change in terms of how programs that were provided by the nonprofit sector and SSEs in general were being defined in terms of their relationship with the government. What government was providing, what government was downloading to the sector. They were shaping or determining how services are defined, how the needs of the communities are being defined. So the mission and the values of the nonprofit sector and the SSEs in general were being influenced by the relationship and, rightly so, government policies, and how government policies were having both negative and positive impact in defining the SSE sector in Canada and in the West generally, in most Western countries. Since the 1980s, especially, it's increased significantly in the 1990s.
We cannot find many SSE-related courses in business schools yet. And SSE community also does not seem to have much developed these courses about human resource management or HRM either. What do you think the role of human resource management should be in the SSE?
Thank you for that question. The question is divided into two parts. You indicated that you're unable to find many HRM courses about SSE, specifically in business schools. I think business schools are going through, and it's been for over a decade now, going through a process of trying to define and understand SSEs. Because the way SSEs are, many people have different definition. Some will say voluntary sector, some will say nonprofit sector, some will say third sector, some will say SSE, some would simply say social enterprise, social entrepreneurship, and social economy. And all these tags or labels or definitions have implications for how they are taught, who is teaching them, the research that are involved in it. And business schools are looking at it and saying, okay, which of this is related to managing people in formal organizations? There are some research that essentially says, oh, we have a bigger SSE than those that are actually registered or incorporated. Some are not even incorporated. How do we research them? How do we know about it? So business schools are trying to understand this. More importantly, SSEs by definition are not established to make profits. So they're not profit organizations. So business schools typically are often interested in businesses that are established to make a profit, to achieve return on investment for investors, are different from the public sector. So they are trying to say, okay, do they really belong in business schools? And if they belong in business schools, how do we understand them? How do we define them? I just completed a conference over the weekend in which someone presented a paper on social enterprises. And when I asked the question, what is your definition of social enterprises? The presenter said, oh, they self-identify as social enterprise. I said, oh, you cannot simply self-identify as social enterprises. You must meet specific criteria in terms of the services you provide, the revenue you generate, the outcomes for your stakeholders. So, and that is what business schools are trying to understand when they say, oh, SSC, social and supportive social economy organizations. The business schools are trying to understand it. And I think in the long run, it will happen, but it will take some time. And when you look at the literature, if you're publishing about SSC, it is only very recently that we've started seeing publication about SSC in the mainstream management journals. You often see publications about SSC in specialized nonprofit, social economy, social entrepreneurship, specialized journals. We don't see them often enough to say in mainstream Academy of Management, Journal of Management, all this mainstream management journals. But it is happening slowly. It is increasing. And some of us who specialize in this area, we've received feedback when we submit, someone will say, can you prove how this organization is different from mainstream business organizations? That is your entire article. You can write 10, 5 articles trying to just differentiate an SSE from a regular business organization. So we invest a lot of research energy trying to just justify our sector rather than looking at the issues that are important in our sector. So that is the first part. The second part of your question is HRM, how we manage, deploy, retain, motivate people in SSC. The reason why we have limited research is related to the first part, but it's also important to understand that when we understand the sector, at the center of SSCs is the people. One of the unique characteristics of the SSC nonprofit social economy organizations is the fact that they cannot use technology to provide the services that are provided by people. Now, over the past 1 year, we've been talking we've been having a lot of discussions about AI, artificial intelligence. artificial intelligence is very, very good. It is important. But in nonprofit social economy sector, the kind of services that these organizations provide are transactional and very emotionally engaged. So why artificial intelligence, automation will help in other sectors, in the social economy sector, you still need people because the services are emotionally involved, are socially involved. So as a result, it means that understanding how we recruit, how we retain, how we motivate employees, volunteers, how we engage the community is central to the effectiveness of social economy organizations. Again, we do not have many courses. I can count on just one hand how many universities I know in Canada have specialized courses, HRM courses in the entire program, undergraduate or graduate courses that has focused specifically on HRM in social. We don't have them. So are they important? They're critical. They're the centerpiece of what social economy organizations are. But because business schools are still trying to understand them, are still trying to define them, then that's why we do not have many courses in them. We do not have many publications in them. And those of us who do research in the area, we have to often justify ourselves. Oh, this is the sector I'm talking about. This is why a social enterprise that is bridged between a nonprofit and a social enterprises in Toronto, downtown Toronto, Canada, one has to differentiate it from, say, hospital or from a bank or from a community development organization that is tied to a business organization. So those actually are some of the reasons, but I think we're making significant progress. It will take time. We're making significant progress. We're doing more research. We're getting more publication even in mainstream management journals.
I hope to see more and more journal articles in the leading journals of management studies, especially articles about human resource management in the context of SSE, SSE organizations and enterprises. Thank you very much. And you wrote an entry on the working conditions and wages of the SSE organizations and enterprises for the encyclopedia. Could you explain a little bit about your entry and what did you want to share with readers through your entry?
The goal of the entry or the contribution was to highlight the state and the dynamics, the conditions of working or employment, working relationship in social economy and solidarity economy organizations in general, to explain what are the characteristics of employment in the sector. What does it mean to be an employee in the sector? What does it mean to have employment relationship in the sector? And from there, we want to explain how the employment relationship and working conditions relate to wages, specifically. The first aspect is to understand the sector. As I indicated when I was describing why we don't have a lot of research or publications and courses, the sector itself is complex to understand because it bridges many subsectors. And people will often, even researchers, will often choose one area and we use a general label for them. Some will not agree that nonprofit organizations are the same as voluntary organizations. Some will not agree that social enterprises in Canada, which is significantly different from social enterprises in the United States, we need to explain them differently. So we want to explain the characteristics of the social economy workplace itself. What is the workplace about, meaning the sector itself, the factors that underlie the working condition. This is the characteristics and how they play into the defining work and working condition in the sector, and how this operating environment, both the external environment and the internal environment, impacts the working conditions in the sector. including wages. So one of the key factors, just to summarize, will be the mission, the values of the sector. Organizations that are established to provide services that are not owned by anybody, they do not generate profit. Any revenue generated, excess revenue generated, is reinvested into the services that are provided to make a difference in the community, to drive change in society. So defining the mission and the values is the critical starting point of any discussion of working conditions, because we have in the literature, it's now well established that people are actually attracted based on the mission and values of the sector. People want to work in the sector based on those critical characteristics of the sector. Then we now talk about the funding. We talk about revenue. How do they generate revenue? What is it? What are the sources of funding of the sector? And how does this play into the ability of the organization to attract, to retain, and motivate employees? Because if your funding is stable, is predictable, if your revenue sources are well defined, and you are able to outline, implement strategies to help you generate revenue, then you can design your HR, human resource practices and strategy to align with that. But if you have a situation where your funding, your revenue is always unpredictable, is always contingent on public policy, different governments in power, then you are continuously essentially fighting fires. It means that your retention of employees, recruitment of employees, motivation will be impacted directly, not even indirectly, will be impacted directly. So understanding how the internal and external factors impact how social economy organizations attract, retain, and motivate employees is very, very important to help both employees, managers, board members, and policymakers at the highest level to understand how this all impact the outcomes of social economy organizations. And the outcomes are critical to society. In Canada, we have a sector that is huge and has a significant impact on not just the social outcomes in society, but even the gross domestic GDP of the country. And it is the same in many other countries. So understanding these challenges is not just at the employee level, but also at the organizational level, as well as the societal level.
Thank you, Professor Kunle Akingbola, for being with us today.
Thank you very much for having me.
That's all for today's episode of SSE Essentials. The Encyclopedia of the Social and Solidarity Economy is available online for free. It is also for sale in hard copy for your libraries or bookshelves. Check the links in the podcast description to get your own copy. Thanks for listening, and stay tuned for the next episode of SSE Essentials.